The diner's neon sign flickered like a heartbeat against the rain-soaked street, casting a red glow over Caleb's face as he stood frozen, staring through the window. He'd built this place, the Rusty Spoon, from nothing, but tonight he wasn't the owner. He was just a stranger in a worn jacket, undercover to see why his business was bleeding money. What he saw instead was a waiter, wrist in a brace, balancing plates with a grace that defied pain, and a smile that hid something deeper. Caleb, 38, broad-shouldered with a salt and pepper beard, hadn't set foot in his own diner as a customer in years. He'd been too busy managing his empire of restaurants across Oregon, crunching numbers, and firing managers who couldn't keep up. The Rusty Spoon, his first love, was slipping, sales down, reviews souring, and he needed to know why. So, he'd come to Pendleton, a sleepy town where the diner sat like a relic of his past, to blend in and observe. He pushed open the door, the bell jingling softly, and slid into a corner booth. The waiter, Ethan, 26, moved through the diner like he was dancing. His blonde curls caught the light, and his green eyes sparkled with a warmth that made customers linger. But Caleb noticed the brace on Ethan's right wrist, the way he winced when he set down a heavy tray, yet never let his smile falter. Ethan was serving a table of truckers, laughing at their jokes, refilling their coffee with a practiced ease. Caleb's sharp eyes caught something else. The way Ethan's gaze darted to a coworker, a lanky guy with a buzz cut named Jake, 27, who was wiping down the counter. There was a spark there, unspoken but electric, and Caleb felt a pang he couldn't name. He ordered a burger, keeping his head down, but his attention stayed on Ethan. The diner wasn't busy, only a handful of regulars nursing coffee or pie, but the energy felt off. The other staff moved sluggishly, and Jake seemed distracted, his eyes following Ethan too. Caleb scribbled notes on a napkin. Staff morale low. Ethan overworking. Jake unfocused. But he couldn't stop watching Ethan. The way he leaned close to a lonely old woman, listening to her ramble about her late husband, or how he slipped an extra slice of pie to a kid whose mom looked too tired to argue. As the night wore on, Caleb overheard whispers, a cook muttering about Ethan's drama, and Jake's sharp retort to leave it alone. Drama? Caleb's instincts kicked in. He needed to know more. He lingered, sipping coffee that grew cold, until Ethan finally took a break, sitting at the counter with a glass of water. Jake joined him, their shoulders brushing, and Caleb saw it. The way Ethan's fingers grazed Jake's, the way Jake's tough exterior softened. They were together or wanted to be, and the diner's small-town air felt heavier for it. Caleb's phone buzzed, a text from his CFO about another budget cut. He ignored it. Something about Ethan's resilience, his quiet strength despite the brace, the way he and Jake stole glances, stirred something in Caleb. He'd spent years building walls around his heart, his past, his identity. He'd grown up in a town like this, where being openly gay wasn't an option, and he'd buried that part of himself to chase success. Watching Ethan, he felt a crack in that armor. The next night, Caleb returned, same booth, same disguise. Ethan was there again, wrist still braced, but now Caleb noticed the shadows under his eyes. The diner's problems were clearer. A lazy manager, Sarah, 45, who spent half her shift on her phone. A cook, Miguel, 30, who cut corners, and a tension among the staff that simmered like a pot about to boil over. But Ethan was the glue, covering shifts, calming customers, and keeping the place alive. Caleb wrote, "Ethan is the heart of this place. Why is he breaking himself for it?" He overheard more. Sarah snapping at Ethan for being too friendly with Jake. A customer, an older man with a trucker hat, muttering about those types. When Ethan and Jake laughed together, Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew that tone, that judgment. He'd heard it as a kid, felt it like a blade. But Ethan didn't flinch. He kept working, kept smiling, even as his wrist trembled under the weight of a tray. Caleb started coming every night, blending into the background. He learned Ethan's story in fragments. A car accident months ago had shattered his wrist, and he couldn't afford to stop working. Jake, fiercely protective, was saving for a mechanic certification, dreaming of a life beyond the diner. They were saving for a future together, but the town's whispers and Sarah's hostility made it feel impossible. Caleb saw himself in them, the version of himself he'd buried to become the man who owned 5 restaurants but hadn't felt alive in years. One night, a drunk customer grabbed Ethan's arm, demanding faster service. Ethan winced, his brace twisting, and Jake was there in an instant, voice low but firm, telling the man to back off. The diner went quiet. Sarah stormed over, berating Ethan for causing a scene. Caleb's fists clenched under the table. He wanted to stand, to fire Sarah on the spot, but he stayed silent, watching. Ethan apologized, defusing the tension, but Caleb saw the cost in his eyes. By the 5th night, Caleb couldn't stay detached. He caught Ethan alone, wiping down tables after closing. "You work too hard," Caleb said, voice gruff, testing the waters. Ethan laughed, a tired sound. "Gotta keep this place alive, you know?" Caleb wanted to say he did know, that he owned the damn place, but instead, he asked, "Why do you stay?" Ethan's eyes flickered to Jake, who was stacking chairs. "For him. For us." Caleb's heart twisted. He'd forgotten what it felt like to fight for someone. Caleb's nights at the Rusty Spoon became a ritual. He'd sit in his booth, nursing coffee, watching Ethan and Jake navigate the diner's chaos with a quiet strength that made his chest ache. He was supposed to be here for business, to fix the numbers, fire the dead weight, but he was unraveling, caught in their story. Ethan, 26, with his relentless optimism, and Jake, 27, with his guarded heart, were fighting for something Caleb had long given up on. Love in a world that didn't always make room for it. The diner's problems were glaring now. Sarah, the manager, was a walking disaster, ignoring complaints and skimming tips to balance the books. Miguel, the cook, was cutting corners, using cheap ingredients, skipping prep, while Ethan and Jake picked up the slack. Caleb's notes grew longer. Fire Sarah. Audit inventory. Train staff. But he couldn't stop watching Ethan, whose wrist brace was fraying, or Jake, whose sharp edges softened only for Ethan. Their stolen moments, fingers brushing, quiet laughs, were a rebellion against the diner's toxic air. One evening, Caleb overheard Sarah cornering Ethan in the back. "You and Jake need to tone it down," she hissed. "Customers are talking." Ethan's voice was steady but strained. "We're just doing our jobs." Sarah scoffed. "Keep it that way or you're out." Caleb's blood boiled. He'd seen managers like her before, petty, power-hungry, but this felt personal. He remembered his own youth, hiding who he was to avoid trouble. He'd built the Rusty Spoon as a haven, but it had become a cage for Ethan and Jake. Caleb started talking to Ethan during lulls, small conversations that felt like stepping onto thin ice. "How's the wrist?" he'd ask, and Ethan would shrug, saying, "It's fine, just slows me down." But Caleb saw the pain in his movements, the way he gritted his teeth lifting trays. Jake was never far, watching like a hawk, ready to step in. Caleb learned more. Ethan was studying part-time for a nursing degree, juggling shifts and classes. Jake was fixing cars on the side, saving every penny. They dreamed of leaving Pendleton, starting fresh somewhere kinder. The town wasn't kind. Caleb heard the whispers, regulars gossiping about the gay waiters, a pastor at a corner table preaching about sin. Ethan and Jake absorbed it, their resilience a quiet defiance. Caleb, who'd spent years numbing himself to judgment, felt shame creep in. He'd let his diner become this. He'd let his fear of being seen keep him distant, and now his haven was failing the people who needed it most. One night, a fight broke out. A customer, a burly man in his 50s, slurred insults at Ethan, calling him names Caleb hadn't heard since high school. Jake stepped in, voice low but dangerous. "Leave him alone." The man shoved Jake, and Ethan, despite his injury, pulled Jake back, whispering, "He's not worth it." Sarah did nothing, watching from the counter with a smirk. Caleb nearly broke cover, his hand gripping the table, but he stayed put, writing. Customer hostility unchecked. Sarah enables it. He couldn't stay silent forever. The next night, he approached Ethan after closing, the diner empty except for the hum of the fridge. "You don't deserve this," Caleb said, voice rough. Ethan looked surprised, then smiled faintly. "It's just how it is here." Caleb wanted to confess. He owned this place, he could fix it. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he asked about Jake. Ethan's face lit up, his voice soft. "He's my reason to keep going. We're saving to get out. Start over." Caleb nodded, his own dreams of escape from years ago echoing in his mind. Caleb started digging deeper. He checked the books after hours, using his owner's access. Sarah was stealing small amounts but consistent. The diner was understaffed, overworked, and Ethan was carrying the weight. Caleb's plan formed. Fire Sarah, hire a new manager, give Ethan and Jake a raise. But it wasn't enough. He saw how the town's prejudice wore them down, how Ethan's wrist wasn't healing because he couldn't rest. Caleb felt a pull to do more, to be more than the man who'd hidden his truth to build an empire. By the 10th night, Caleb was no longer just observing. He was invested. He brought Ethan coffee during a break, asked about his nursing studies. Ethan opened up, sharing how he wanted to help people, how his accident had made him realize life was too short to hide who he was. Jake joined them, wary but warming to Caleb's quiet presence. Caleb saw their love as a mirror, reflecting the life he'd never dared to live. He'd been successful, but at what cost? The rain hadn't stopped in Pendleton, and neither had Caleb's nightly visits to the Rusty Spoon. He was no longer just the owner in disguise. He was a man haunted by Ethan and Jake's resilience, their love a quiet rebellion against a town that didn't want them. At 38, Caleb had everything: money, power, a name in Oregon's restaurant scene. But watching Ethan, 26, and Jake, 27, fight for each other, he felt hollow. The diner's cracks were undeniable. Sarah's theft was worse than Caleb thought. Thousands siphoned over months, hidden in fake vendor invoices. Miguel's laziness was costing them customers. The food was inconsistent, and complaints piled up. Ethan and Jake were the only ones keeping the place afloat, but the toll was clear. Ethan's wrist brace was dirtier, his movements slower. Jake's protectiveness had turned sharp, his eyes scanning the room for threats. Caleb's notes were a plan now: replace Sarah, fire Miguel, promote Ethan or Jake, fix this place. But it wasn't just about the business. Caleb saw himself in Ethan's quiet strength, in Jake's guarded heart. He'd grown up hiding his own identity, leaving his small town for Portland, where he could be anonymous but never whole. The rusty spoon was supposed to be his legacy, a place of warmth, but it had become a battleground for Ethan and Jake. Caleb felt responsible. One night, a group of regulars, 3 men in their 40s, loud and entitled, targeted Ethan. "Hey, sweetheart," one sneered. "Where's your boyfriend?" Ethan's smile didn't waver, but his eyes dimmed as he refilled their coffee. Jake, wiping tables nearby, froze, his jaw tight. Caleb gripped his mug, ready to intervene, but Ethan handled it, deflecting with a joke. The men laughed, but the air was thick with malice. Sarah, as usual, did nothing, scrolling on her phone. Caleb added to his notes, "Hostile environment." Sarah complicit. He started talking to Ethan and Jake more, building trust. Ethan shared how he'd come out at 19, losing half his family but finding Jake. Jake, quieter, admitted he'd been in foster care, learning to trust no one until Ethan. Their love was hard-won, and Caleb envied it. He'd had flings, brief connections in Portland's gay bars, but nothing real. Watching them, he wondered what he'd sacrificed for success. The breaking point came on a Friday. A customer, a woman in her 60s, complained about her cold eggs, then pointed at Ethan. "I don't want him serving me. You know why?" Sarah nodded, reassigning Ethan to the back. Jake's face darkened, and he followed Ethan, their voices low but heated. Caleb overheard Ethan whisper, "We can't afford to lose this job." Jake snapped, "I'm done watching them hurt you." Caleb's heart pounded. He couldn't stay undercover much longer. That night, he confronted Sarah after closing. "You're letting this place fall apart," he said, keeping his tone neutral. Sarah smirked, thinking he was just a nosy regular. "Mind your business." Caleb bit back the truth. He was her boss, and left, his plan solidifying. He'd fire her, but he needed evidence to avoid a lawsuit. He started documenting everything: Sarah's theft, her negligence, the hostile environment. Caleb also started helping in small ways. He tipped Ethan generously, slipped Jake advice about mechanic certifications. He asked Ethan about his nursing dreams, learning how the accident had derailed him but not his hope. Ethan's passion, his refusal to break, reminded Caleb of who he used to be, before money, before fear. Jake, meanwhile, opened up about his past, his voice rough but honest. "Ethan's the only home I've got," he said one night, and Caleb felt a lump in his throat. The diner was a microcosm of Pendleton's divides: acceptance versus judgment, hope versus hate. Caleb saw it in the customers. The old woman who adored Ethan, the trucker who sneered at him. He saw it in himself, too, the man who'd built a haven but let it rot. He started researching, calling his lawyer about labor laws, discrimination policies. He wanted to protect Ethan and Jake, to make the rusty spoon what it was meant to be. By the 15th night, Caleb was ready to act. He had proof of Sarah's theft, a plan to overhaul the staff, and a growing need to tell Ethan and Jake the truth. But first, he needed to understand them fully. He invited them for coffee after their shift, posing as a regular. "You two are the best part of this place," he said. Ethan blushed, and Jake's eyes softened. "We're just trying to survive," Ethan said. Caleb nodded, knowing he was about to change everything. Caleb's double life was unraveling. By day, he was the owner, fielding calls from his CFO about budgets and expansions. By night, he was a ghost in his own diner, watching Ethan, 26, and Jake, 27, fight for their place in a world that didn't always want them. The rusty spoon was bleeding, but Caleb's heart was bleeding more, for the men he'd come to admire, for the man he'd buried to become who he was. He had the evidence now. Sarah's doctored invoices, security footage of her pocketing cash. Miguel's shortcuts were documented too, expired ingredients, half-cooked meals. But firing them wasn't enough. Caleb wanted to rebuild the diner, make it a haven again, for Ethan, for Jake, for everyone. He started drafting policies. Anti-discrimination training, better wages, health benefits. He researched Ethan's wrist injury, learning it needed surgery he couldn't afford. Caleb's wealth felt like a weight. He could fix this, but would it matter if the town's prejudice remained? One night, the tension snapped. A customer, a man in his 30s with a buzz cut and a sneer, tripped Ethan as he passed, sending a tray crashing. Ethan's wrist buckled, and he gasped, clutching it. Jake was there in seconds, shoving the man back. "Touch him again, and you're done," Jake growled. The man laughed, but the diner went silent. Sarah stormed over, yelling at Ethan and Jake for disrupting service. Caleb stood, ready to reveal himself, but Ethan's quiet plea, "Jake, stop," kept him in his seat. Ethan cleaned the mess, his face pale, and Jake watched, helpless. Caleb couldn't wait anymore. After closing, he pulled Sarah into the office, still undercover, and confronted her. "You're stealing. You're letting this place rot." Sarah laughed, thinking he was bluffing. "Who are you? The diner police?" Caleb's voice was steel. "You'll find out soon." He left, calling his lawyer to finalize her termination. He'd reveal himself tomorrow, but first, he needed to talk to Ethan and Jake. He found them outside, sharing a cigarette under the diner's awning. Rain dripped around them, and Ethan's brace was soaked. "You okay?" Caleb asked. Ethan nodded, but his eyes were tired. Jake's voice was rough. "He needs surgery, but we're stuck here." Caleb took a breath. "What if you didn't have to stay?" Ethan looked at him, confused, and Jake's eyes narrowed. "Who are you, really?" Caleb almost confessed, but instead, he said, "Someone who sees you." They didn't push, but he felt their trust growing. The next night, Caleb executed his plan. He fired Sarah before her shift, presenting the evidence. She raged, threatening to sue, but his lawyer had it covered. Miguel was next, replaced with a new cook from Portland. Caleb hired a temporary manager, a woman named Lisa, 40, with a no-nonsense attitude and a history of running inclusive restaurants. He stayed undercover, watching the changes unfold. The staff noticed, tensions eased, service improved, but Ethan and Jake were still cautious, unaware of who was pulling the strings. Caleb started leaving anonymous gifts. A new wrist brace for Ethan, a mechanic's manual for Jake. He paid for Ethan's surgery through a community fund, keeping his name out of it. But the town's hostility lingered. A group of regulars boycotted, spreading rumors about the gay diner. Caleb saw Ethan's smile falter, Jake's fists clench. He knew money couldn't fix everything. He needed to show them they weren't alone. He revealed himself on a quiet Sunday. The diner was half empty, and Ethan was struggling with a heavy tray. Caleb stood, walked to the counter and said, "I'm Caleb Harper. I own this place." The room froze. Ethan's eyes widened, and Jake stepped closer, protective. Caleb continued, voice steady. "I've been watching, and you two are why this diner still has a soul. I'm sorry I let it become this." He outlined his changes. New management, better pay, a zero-tolerance policy for hate. He looked at Ethan. "Your surgery's covered. No strings." Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came. Jake's eyes glistened. The staff clapped, some warily, But the air shifted. Caleb felt exposed, his own truth bubbling up. He'd hidden his identity, not just as the owner, but as a gay man, for too long. Watching Ethan and Jake, he wanted to be brave. "I know what it's like," he said softly. "To hide who you are. I'm done hiding." Ethan reached for Jake's hand, and Caleb saw himself in their courage. The rusty spoon was transforming, but Caleb's revelation was just the start. At 38, he'd spent years building walls around his heart, his truth. But Ethan, 26, and Jake, 27, had cracked them open. The diner, once a symbol of his ambition, was now a chance to right his wrongs, to make it a haven for those who'd been pushed to the margins. Ethan's surgery was scheduled, paid for anonymously through Caleb's community fund. He promoted Ethan to assistant manager, giving him time to heal and study. Jake got a raise, and Caleb connected him with a mechanic's apprenticeship in Portland. The diner's new manager, Lisa, brought order, training the staff to handle conflict and fostering a warmth that drew customers back. But Pendleton's small-town heart was slow to change. Some regulars returned, others didn't, and whispers of the gay diner persisted. Caleb started being open about his identity, first with the staff, then with customers. He shared his story in a quiet moment with Ethan and Jake. Growing up in a town like Pendleton, hiding his sexuality, leaving for Portland to escape but never truly living. "I built this place to be a home," he said, "but I let it become something else." Ethan, his wrist healing, squeezed Jake's hand. "You're making it right," he said. Jake nodded, his usual guardedness softening. "Takes guts to do that." Caleb didn't stop there. He hosted a community night, offering free coffee and pie, inviting locals to see the diner's new heart. Some came curious, others stayed away. Ethan and Jake worked the event, their ease with each other a quiet defiance. An older woman, a regular who'd always liked Ethan, told Caleb, "This place feels alive again." A few younger customers, college kids from the local community college, started coming regularly, drawn by the diner's new vibe. But the pastor from before showed up, preaching about traditional values. Caleb stepped in, calm but firm. "This is a place for everyone. If you can't respect that, the door's there." The pastor left, and Ethan smiled, a weight lifting. Caleb's changes rippled. The diner's reviews improved, and sales stabilized. Ethan, recovering from surgery, started classes again, his dream of nursing closer. Jake's apprenticeship gave him purpose, and he and Ethan planned to move to Portland, where they could live openly. Caleb felt a mix of pride and loss. He'd grown attached, their courage a mirror for his own. One night, as the diner closed, Ethan and Jake invited Caleb to stay for a drink. They sat at the counter, the neon sign humming outside. Ethan raised a glass of soda, his green eyes bright. "To second chances," he said. Jake clinked his glass, looking at Caleb. "And to not hiding." Caleb's throat tightened. He'd spent years chasing success, thinking it would fill the void. But here, with two men who'd fought for love against all odds, he felt something better. Purpose. Caleb never went fully public with his story. Pendleton wasn't ready, but he lived it quietly. He started dating cautiously in Portland and kept the rusty spoon as a beacon. Ethan and Jake moved a year later, sending Caleb postcards from their new life. The diner thrived, not just as a business but as a home for those who needed it. Caleb learned that success wasn't in the numbers, but in the lives he touched. Ethan's broken hand had been the crack that let light into Caleb's world, and he'd never go back to the shadows.